As I confront my enemy, shadows from my past keep resurfacing. Old wounds and betrayals prevent me from fully engaging in the battle. I must face my past to embrace the challenges ahead. Chapter 36. Trial to Werewolf Side. I used my brute force as I shoved open the door, the creaking ringing in my ears as they shuffle forward and back searching for any dangers. A breeze of fresh air flew through my face, the air blowing through my hair forcing me to pull my ears to my head. "Yeah, you're probably screwed." The vampire side of me said, a slight bitchiness in her tone as she retreated to the back of my mind. "You're an asshole." I rolled my eyes, glad that she had finally left my mind. "Use my abilities. It might help," she told me, unsure of herself as she spoke softly to me, as if she was nervous of my answer. "That's actually nice. Thanks for telling me." I smiled through my mind, a sense of ease enveloping me. She smiled back. "At least I can watch you die slower that way." A smirk at the end of her words. I lightly chuckled. "Enjoy the show," I mumbled to myself. She smirked through my mind, her presence becoming less and less noticeable. I finally took a look at the new world that I had entered. It was similar to the last one. The trees seemed the same. The pathway felt the same, and the moon and stars looked as if it hadn't even moved. The difference between this dream world and the last is that this forest wasn't set ablaze. It was gorgeous. I sighed and drew my ears back, walking slowly forward as I sensed for any dangers nearby. I heard the far-off calls of different birds, the sound of leaves flowing through the breeze as they crinkled to the ground. I heard the mesmerizing sound of an ear-piercing howl. My vampire side flinched, while I kept a brave face. She was petrified. I had never felt something like this ever. I was scared for her. My wolf side, on the other hand, only wanted to brightly howl back. My tail was wagging and I didn't try to stop it. I felt it was useless. What I did have to do was slap my hands over my mouth, stopping my wolf from howling back. I gulped loudly when I realized that she wasn't going to howl. As I began to walk forward again, it wasn't long till I saw the source of the howl. A dark grey wolf stood atop the edge of a cliff, her back facing towards me. There was not a doubt in my mind that told me this was the thing I had to fight. She was tall and muscular, the size of a delta, her fur blowing calmly through the soft breeze that flowed around these mountains. She slowly began to turn around, showing me her light grey eyes, a hint of blue swirling inside of them. Isn't it crazy how someone could find enjoyment from destroying the lives of others? I was shocked, to say the least. The wolf spoke. "It's a plane of dreams, a border of reality and death. Anything can happen here," she told me softly, wiseness in her voice. "Do I fight you?" I asked, unsure, my ears drawing back and my tail going limp. The wolf dropped her gaze to the ground, slightly showing me her neck as she looked to the side. "Yes, I do. It's what the moon goddess needs to happen," she responded softly, showing me a sort of wolfish smile. "Can't you just, I don't know, submit?" I asked quietly, my hands gesturing to myself. The wolf in front of me turned towards me, a smirk playing on her lips. "Where's the fun in that?" Then she howled loudly. I followed in suite, having no control over my body as my head turned to the moon and exerting a howl. We finished at the same time, both of us staring towards each other. "First one to submit wins," she told me, a playful snarl at the end of her words. "Okay." I snarled right back at her, a more light-hearted one. She was the first to make a move, her paws moving fast as she raced towards me. I didn't have time to react as she knocked me to the ground, the air being taken from my lungs. She ran for me again, a powerful growl emitting from her jaws as she charged once more, her teeth visible as she snapped my way. I scrambled to my feet as I took off the other direction, knowing that I was most likely going to be beaten by this wolf. "Use my crystals, idiot." I raised my senses as I realized my vampire side's words. Why didn't I think of that? I spun around quickly, to find the wolf at full charge only meters in front of me. I pulled my arms to my face, knowing I didn't have any time to use my abilities, hoping it was a soft shove. The sound of vibrating matter made me tense. A loud bang soon after. Gazing forward, I found a perfect wall of dark purple crystals. glistening in the moonlight. The wolf behind the crystals slowly yet stood up from the ground, shaking out her fur as she seemed to lose her balance from the impact. She gazed straight through the tall pillars, straight into my eyes, a growl emitting from her throat. I laughed softly, actually shocked at the fact of what happened. The wolf didn't seem to like that, as she growled louder and began to run around the crystals. Shit! I screeched as I pressed my palms to the ground, forcing a crystal to burst from the ground underneath me and launch me into the air. I was hoping that it would stop near height, so the wolf couldn't attack me. But not realizing when the crystal stopped, I was thrown from the pillar and began to freefall. I screeched loudly as the trees became closer and closer towards my face. The beauty of the forest mesmerizing, but I didn't pay attention to the trees as the ones underneath me grew closer. Not thinking of using my crystals to save me from falling and hitting the ground, I fell through the thicket of trees and hit the ground with a loud thump, the ground and trees seeming to vibrate around me. I groaned loudly, holding my head that seemed to continue spinning even minutes after the impact. A growl brought back my adrenaline. The feeling of paws hitting the dirt trembled through the earth till I could sense it. I stood to my feet fast, running from the scene with minimal effort. This fight needed to end soon if I wanted to make it out alive. The wolf would win if I didn't do something soon. Hating myself for the decision I have come to, I stopped mid-sprint. Dirt and grass flying around me as my feet skidded to a halt. I stood straight, turning to the direction the wolf was most likely going to come from. The wolf soon did appear through the trees, its glowing grey and blue eyes connecting with mine. The crazed smile the wolf wore made me visibly tense as I whispered my apologies. She snarled towards me, positioning her feet, as if me not moving was a sign that I had submitted. The wolf burst through the brush, its paws in the air as it leapt over the bushes and roots of nearby trees. She barked loudly my way, a growl afterwards. I held my breath as I watched the crystal I controlled shoot through the ground and straight through the chest of the wolf. She whimpered and yelped as she hung mid-air, suspended by the crystal that tore through her chest. She looked at me softly, her mouth curving to a frown as she experienced pain unimaginable. Her eyes, though, held happiness, tears flowing down her fluffy cheeks as she stared at me. "I submit," she whispered, the crystal disappearing into the ground instantly. She looked at me with a lopsided smile. "Do you know what to do?" she asked softly. "Yes," I whispered, tears springing to my eyes as I watched the destruction I caused. "To my audiobook extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Then, with a slight limp and on that sturdy paw, she waddled over to me. Her sheer size was the height of mine as she rubbed her furry body over my face. She moved away from my face, a small smile on her furry face as she gave me a small smile, her body growing fainter and fainter, just like my vampire side. "You have my full support." Then she disappeared from my view. The only thing she left behind was the blood on the dark green grass. "Defeat her yet?" the vampire side asked. "You tell me." My wolf side laughed back, while my vampire side groaned loudly, the sound echoing through my head. "This is really weird," I told both of them as I followed my gut, which led me back to the cliff I first saw the mesmerizing wolf. "Why couldn't you just die? I have to deal with fluffy ass now." "Ugh," my vampire side told me. "Hey, shut up, you blood-sucking freak," my wolf yelled back. I rolled my eyes as I got annoyed at addressing the voices in my head as vampire side and wolf side. I thought I came up with an idea. "Let's give you guys names," I yelled excitedly to them. "Sure, I don't mind," both of them said softly, both wearing a joyful smile. "Okay, I like the name Georgina and Rebecca. Anyone object?" I begged Rebecca. She shouted rather loudly. "I guess I'm Georgina." "Perfect," I told them both out loud, as I began to smile at the approaching cliff. I stood on the edge, tiny rocks falling from the edge as my feet stood planted on the edge. "Jump," Georgina whispered quietly. "What?" I yelled, gazing at the raging water that filled the bottom of the ravine. "I'm with Ava. I ain't jumping. Do you both want to be stuck in this place for the rest of your lives?" She shouted at us both, my ears tucking themselves underneath my hair and my tail being brought in between my legs. "No, no," Next trial is after the water. You have my full support. She told me, her presence leaving my mind. I'll see you in the afterlife then, Ava. Rebecca told me. Her presence leaving my mind as well. The next trial is even worse than Rebecca and I combined. You have our full support, right, Rebecca? Yeah. Sure. Whatever. I gulped loudly, feeling anxious about the next trial. Here goes nothing. Then I jumped. Chapter 37. Thank you, Ashton POV. The new guy was actually good company. He didn't speak to me often, but he always managed to con me into eating or bathing. I hated it, but every time he told me to do things like that, he would pull the card more often than, not always adding to the end of his orders. What would Ava want? And every time I would respond with, she would want me to take care of myself. As I trudged off mad that he won another fight, I learnt that his name was Ash and he was the alpha to the Blood Moon Pack. One thing that always annoyed me is whenever I asked him how he knew he wouldn't respond. Just a look that said, drop it. It's only been 48 hours since Ash came, and I'm already feeling better. But it always felt like he never told me things. But everyone has their secret, right? So as usual, I sat in my same uncomfortable chair, but with a companion this time on the other side of Ava's still cold body. There was a heartbeat though. That heartbeat was the only hopeful thing people held on to. If people lost their hope, I wouldn't think Ava would want to pull through. So I hoped with all my heart along with Nathan. The pack and Dash. My hands still gripped hers firmly, small tears cascading down my cheeks as I watched the Ipcha I gave her unmoving on her face. The scar healing over so it was a soft purple. I swallowed loudly. My throat felt dry. Go get some water. Ash whispered to me, his voice sounding just as deprived and scratchy from lack of water as I felt. I won't get any unless you do. I replied monotone, my head flopping onto Ava's bed. The whole mattress and base shaking with the newfound weight and pressure of my face. How about you go? Then I'll go after you, so just in case Ava wakes up, one of us can get whoever is drinking so they can rush back. He asked, his plan sounding foolproof. I sighed loudly. Fine. Then pushed myself off the chair roughly, lifting my weight as I stumbled out the door to where the drink taps were. The corridor was quiet. Not even a nurse or doctor was nearby. The reason being that most people are either hung over or too depressed to try and do anything. So no one gets hurt anymore. That might be something positive at the moment. Without Ava, no one has any spirit to fight anymore. I gazed down at the tiles as I shoved my fists into the pockets of my dirty black jumpsuit. It wasn't anything fancy, just a plain old black jumpsuit that I wore everywhere I went because it was comfortable and let me move freely in it. My hair fell into my face as I watched my feet walk on the tiles with a quiet slat sound heard afterwards as I progressed my way to the silver drinking fountain. Soon enough, I turned a sharp left with the fountain right on the turn. Pressing the button softly, water began to flow out the little pipe in a sort of pretty motion. I pushed my face closer to the rush of the water, my dry lips instantly sucking on the water in an attempt to drink the water. The feeling felt amazing as the cool liquid slid down my throat and through my esophagus as the feeling disappeared when it reached my stomach. I sighed happily and pushed myself away from the fountain, walking back to Ava's hospital room. The jumpsuit flowed as I gained my pace to reach Ava faster, not wanting to miss even a second of her next to me. She was my best friend, and if it meant that I would have to be deprived of the necessary needs for a growing she-wolf, then I would be happy to do so. I shoved open the light oakwood door, the same sight that I left with. At emotionals as Ash and still Ava. As with new people, I was wary of Ash, but I felt like I had known him all my life. Plus, I trusted my wolf with my life, and she doesn't even feel scared when he's in the room. It's like having the big brother that I never got to have. He noticed my presence, lifting his head up to look at me as I stood in the entryway. A frown etched on my face at the sight of a deathly-looking Ava and a tired Dash. Your turn, I told him monotone, as I made my way back to my chair and sitting down. I'll be back in a little bit. If she wakes up, yell for me. The chair slightly scraping across the ground as he left the room quietly, the door being shut so softly it was as if fairies had closed it. I made myself comfortable on the uncomfortable chair, fixing myself and pulling the chair closer to the bed so I could once again take my place to hold Ava's hand. laying my heavy and aching head on the bed as my thumb rubbed up and down her hand. The same coldness as time and time again. The chair felt the same. Alva's hand felt the same and the room looked the same. Though I was felt with such an anxious feeling, it was as if I was put in a completely new situation, where I knew nothing and didn't understand anything. At that moment the door opened again. I turned hoping it was Ash who I could feel safe around, but instead it was the man that I was forced to call my brother. "Hey Jen," he said so casually as he stared at me, his posture happy and a smile on his face, but his eyes blazed with fury. I gulped loudly, praying that Ash would come through the door at any second. "Go away," I said boldly, making sure to keep the shakiness out of my voice. Even if at the moment I feared my brother more than anything, I would never want to build a sibling relationship with Jake ever again. His smile began to go crooked, his eyes still burning with rage. "Come on. You don't mean that." His voice trying to be happy but sounded like he was on the border of snapping. "I do. I don't want to talk to you ever again," I screamed, pointing his way. Jake's hands curled into fist at his sides, his smile turning more crooked at the second as his eyes continued to burn hatred into mine. "I know you're upset," he rehearsed, his words sounding like a 5-year-old who didn't want to do the talent show. "I would be too if my protector is DYI. Shut the fuck up and get out." My hand gesturing insanely to the door, hoping he left me the fuck alone. At this he seemed to snap, his smile turning into a snarl, his eyes burning more furiously, his fist turning white. His posture turned into a shaking one. I became petrified of him. I had overstepped my boundaries. "You little fucking bitch. You will treat me with respect and love me, damn it," he yelled, his hand gesturing towards me as he slowly stepped forward, as I slowly got out of my chair, fearing for my safety as I slowly stepped back. "Fucking leave me alone," I screamed once again, grabbing the nearest thing to me and throwing it at him, which turned out to be a glass. The glass shattered against Jake's head, his arm failing to deflect the oncoming weapon. He growled lowly at me as he rushed forward at me, his eyes insane as he reached out for me. I tried to run away, but with Ava's bed in the way and the only other exit around Jake, I had no escape, so it ended up with me pressing myself up against the wall. He yelled as he ran for me, drawing his fist back as he prepared to punch me. But as his fist got closer, I ducked quickly, his hand lodging itself deep into the wall. I crawled away through his legs, standing up quickly as I dodged my chair and ran around the end of Ava's bed, straight for the door. I reached for the door handle. Before even being able to grasp it, I was grabbed by my other arm and thrown across the room into the wall, where I had just originally crawled underneath Jake from. Adrenal and rushed state, I stumbled to my feet in a sitting position on the floor as I watched Jake come back around to me. He seemed crazed and insane, his eyes insanely round as he stormed over to me. "You're going to fucking pay for what you caused," he screamed at me as I screamed in terror. "Leave me alone." His hands reaching out to grab me, I pressed myself more into the wall, hoping it would swallow me whole as I watched my brother charge for me. I screeched louder as his hands progressively came closer. My screams were changed to choking sounds as his hands wrapped around my throat, all his force being put into choking me. "You're the reason she left," he yelled, shaking me backwards and forwards as he continued to strangle me. Who?" I asked softly, knowing he would hear it. "You little shit. Why couldn't you just die like I wanted? You are BA'd straight," I whispered, my hands clawing at his in hopes he would release me from his death hold. The world began creeping black as I continued to be cut off from the sweet oxygen as his hands tightened around my windpipe and vocal cords, no doubt damaging them. "Fucking CUN." His words were cut short as his hands angled themselves from my throat, letting me fall to the tiles on the ground with a small slapping sound. I immediately wrapped my fingers around my throat, pressing them closer in hopes to get rid of the stinging sensation. I looked up softly as tears gathered in my eyes. Ash had finally come back and was brutally punching the fuck out of Jake. A smile appeared on my face at the sight. Ash threw my brother's close to dead corpse to the ground, a loud bang echoing throughout the room. "Get out and don't ever hurt her again." As Ash pointed to the door, Jake scrambled to get away, dragging himself across the tiles, his sneakers making a squeak as he ran out of the room. I watched the door slam shut, flinching as it did so. I stared up at Ash's eyes on mine as he watched me with a worried look. "You okay?" he asked softly. I didn't respond as I scrambled to my feet and launched myself into an embrace with him, sobs rocking my body as I held on to Ash, feeling safe as he quietly wrapped his arms around me and drew me closer, allowing me to shed my tears into his shirt. Chapter 38, Sisters and a Brotherly Feeling. Ash POV. I held Jen closer to me as she continued to sob through my shirt, her wet tears staining the fabric, but I didn't mind. Her sobs were scratchy as her vocal cords were most likely damaged, luckily not severely. If I came any later, I wouldn't be surprised if she was dead on the tiles. I sighed and pulled her closer again, her sobs loud and uneven, soft whimpers coming from her throat. I rubbed her back soothingly as she continued to keep a strong hold on me. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly again as her sobs began getting slightly quieter. The only response I got was a nod of her head, and I smiled softly. "At least she's okay. We should get you to a doctor or something. Can you say something for me?" I asked quietly, pushing her away softly while keeping my hands on her shoulders and bending down to her level. She looked me in the eye softly, her face still stained with tears as a couple of fresh ones ran down her cheeks like a small waterfall. "Hello. It was bound to be bad after being chalked, but I wouldn't think it would be this bad." I sighed and began doing the necessary procedure, checking for damage on her throat. As soon as my hand even made contact with her throat and applied slight pressure, she winced. "Shit," I whispered softly. She looked up at me with tears still in her eyes as she began to hiccup. "I'm going to go get the doctor. I want you to stay with Ava and not say anything." She nodded quietly, her movement shaky. I watched as she stumbled into her chair. She brought her knees under her chin, pulling herself into a tiny ball. I sighed and rubbed my face, looking out the door that guy had run out of. And I still didn't even know who or why he was trying to kill Jenny. I would ask her, but if I did, she would ruin her throat more, and at the moment, that's probably the worst thing I could do. "Stay here. I'll get the doctor," I told her as I progressed to the door. I opened the door and was about to walk out when there was a tugging feeling on my black t-shirt. Turning around, I looked down at a still crying Jenny as she looked almost petrified as she stared at me. She whispered, her hands tugging in the bottom of my shirt like a toddler. "Your throat may get worse if I don't get the do." Jennifer began shaking her head violently, new tears forming softly in her big brown eyes, her hair flaying about round her as she shook. "Hey, may I see only BAC? She whispered, her voice so soft and scratchy that I winced at the pain she must be enduring to talk to me. I gazed at the door. How easy it would be for me to just walk out and get the doctor. But my more brotherly side comes out and tells me what I think to do. "Fine. Just stop talking and I won't leave. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Sapphire will come into cheek on Ava's status soon, so she can check your throat then." I told myself more than Jenny as I finally glanced at her. She was smiling brightly, her eyes shining softly with new tears. She was about to open her mouth to say something, but I raised my eyebrow in a playful manner. Her mouth did close, a playful frown on her face. Instead, she wrapped her arms around my waist, a smile on her lips as she hugged me tightly. I sighed softly and hugged her back, my arms bringing her closer as I enjoyed the hug. It reminded me of Melody, my sister. When I was about to leave to go searching for Ava, she had stopped me at the front door. Or I stopped her. Either way, we were probably both caught for doing something bad. Me being I rejected Ava, and her being she had just come back after she fucked her best friend's boyfriend. Flashback. I had just finished pulling my shirt over my head as I sprinted down the steps, taking two at a time. These steps that I've walked up and down all my life, now with a newfound determination. I had just reached the bottom of the steps and pulled my shirt over my head as the front door quietly opened and closed, its soft click echoing through the rather quiet house. There my sister stood, her back facing to me, but no denying it was her. She stood straight until her body slightly leaned against the door as she let out a breath she had seemed to be holding. Her hair was a frizzled mess and the dress she wore was pit on messily as she held onto her bright red heels in one hand and her tone and purse in the other. Her black dress looking nothing like it did when she had first left for this party. "I know you're there," she mumbled quietly in defeat. Probably knowing that since I was that dick of a brother I would tell my parents about her coming home after curfew. For 153 and shit, she was home late. And I'm defiantly leaving very early in the morning. I would press you for more information, but I have more urgent things to tend to rather than deal with you coming home extremely late and extremely uneasy, I said kinda fast as I walked forward quickly and towards the handle in the door, but knowing I couldn't open it till Melody moved her stupid self. "You know how I have feelings for Aldrich, right?" Melody told me as she leaned her head against the door. Only now do I see what a state her makeup, especially her lipstick, is in. It looks horrible, like it used to be perfect but was smudged by something or someone. "Yes," I said back monotone, getting more annoyed the second as she made me lose precious minutes that could be spent finding Ava. He had the same feelings for me. And we done did why did the dirty. She sighed, trying to brighten the mood by saying what that guy of The Simpsons say. His name was something like Sanders. I don't know. I internally slapped her for this. Her best friend June was at the moment dating him and have been dating since like a year ago. "Why would you do this?" I asked, rubbing my temples with my free hand as my other was squeezed firmly on the doorknob. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "I don't know. Either way, I'm screwed. Why are you up late anyway?" she asked kind of curiously as she turned to face me, her body still leaning against the door as she gave me her full attention. I cursed under my breath and glared at Melody quietly asking. She dropped it and left it alone. "So this is big then?" she asked kind of smugly as she knew how to the information out of me and me not realize till about 3 seconds afterwards. "Yes," I mumbled, praying she moved already. "Are we under attack? No. Is someone dying? No. Are the businesses failing? No. Did Mum and Dad die? No. Does it have something to do with Ava? You know." I slapped my forehead as she figured out how to get information out of me again, groaning as my hand slid off my face so I could see her shocked one. "I thought you rejected her," she asked, kinda perplexed as she pulled a cigarette from her purse, playing it between her lips. I cringed at the thing. "I did," I said, turning away from Melody as she pulled a lighter from the same place she got the cigarettes and lit the dumb thing, taking in a big breath, breathing out a larger one. "So why are you trying to find her?" she asked as she breathed normal air for a moment, taking the cigarette away from her lips and dropping her hand to her side as her fingers clutched the cigarette, keeping it from dropping to the floor. I felt her pain. It was intense. I tell her slightly more urgent now as she gives me a raised eyebrows, mucking softly. "I knew she was gonna find trouble," she whispered, chuckling lightly. "What do you mean?" I asked, interested now as my grip on the handle seemed to loosen a lot. Melody took another long breath of the feral thing between her fingers and blew out a large puff of smoke. A look on her face as if she was saying, "Seriously, you didn't notice?" She had that fire burning in her eyes. She told me, smirking an evil smirk as she looked into my eyes. She was out to kill something and drink the blood of her victim. I guess she got killed in the process. She smiled softly, now her face turning to a frown. She said, flicking away that feral thing so it hit the wooden floor. "Be a good brother and put it out for me," she asked, softly gesturing to the dying bud as she made her way upstairs. I did as she said and put my booted foot on top of the bud, successfully destroying whatever heat was in it. "Don't tell Mum or Dad," I yelled quietly up at her. "Don't tell Mum or Dad," she replied back as we both were in a dilemma. "I won't if you won't," I told her, smiling as I watched my sister at the top of the stairs. She turned around to me quietly, a smile on her face. "Don't worry, I won't," she said, quietly walking down the corridor, most likely to her room. I laughed quietly and finally ran out the front door, shutting it quietly as I shifted into my wolf and ran. Flashback over. I hadn't even noticed, as I had most likely been too lost in my thoughts to notice, that Jennifer had fallen asleep leaning against me as her arms still clung to me around my waist as she quietly snored. I rolled my eyes as I picked up the little girl and placed her softly in her chair, grabbing the blanket that sat on the end of Ava's bed that no one ever used and draping it over her as she snuggled more into the chair and blanket, Jenny falling into an even deeper sleep. I sighed quietly and walked back to my own chair, ignoring the mess that littered the floor as I sat down and grabbed Ava's hand, then like today's events hadn't even taken place. My mind began drifting back to its state before going back to wishing that my mate wasn't in a coma, and that it was most likely my fault. The adrenaline rush had vanishing as my thumb stroked across Ava's smooth hand and across her fingers. Chapter 39, a different kind of battle boss battle. I dived straight into the water, the wind rushing around me as gravity pulled me closer to its core. My ears tucked themselves in my frantic hair that leapt through the breeze, and my tail shook with glee as the adrenaline rushed through my body as the water grew closer. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact as the water was mere centimeters away from me, taking in a large breath, hoping I wasn't underwater for too long. Then I broke the surface, the water wrapping itself around me as if I entered a new realm, which I think I did, because instead of feeling the coldness of the wet waves around me, I felt more air. As I opened my eyes, I saw something that confused me. I stood over a hole in the earth, warm air spewing out the center of it that managed to keep me lifted up but didn't let me fall. As I sat there with my butt facing the floor, my hair and tail shooting up as it shook crazily, not by choice but by the pure force of the pressure of the air rushing around me, I tried to move about in this hole, trying to escape to the side where I can stumble to the blackness of the world, or realm that surrounded me. I gulped and tried again, launching myself forward only to end up doing somersaults repeatedly. I sighed as I continued to spin, hoping I would lose momentum or something as I spun. Oh, a voice spoke from behind me, much like my own. I caught only slight glimpses as my body continued to spin in the air. The girl stood behind me. She looked exactly like me when I was back at my old pack with Aiden. I gulped loudly, watching as the old me stood there, her ears twitching every so often and her tail shaking behind her. The eyes are what made scared. They blazed with fear and hate, the only emotions I used to feel at that place. Hi, I whimpered back, waving slightly as I slowly begun to stop spinning. She turned her head to the side and, as if finally recognizing a face, she grew a smile on her face. I honestly didn't think you would make it here. Do you need me to help you out? She asked softly, a small smile on her tiny face. That would honestly be great. I mumbled, laughing softly. Okay. I'll just. Yep, and here you go. She continued to talk to herself as she tried to grab me finally, and so as she latched onto my waist and threw me out of the huge hole thing, I hit the ground with a loud thud, face first, as I was dragged across the black floor by the force of my old me's throw. Oh, sorry. She whimpered, her rapid footsteps heard as she ran over to me. I groaned softly as I used my arms to push the top part of my body off the ground, using one hand to rub my nose. Oh, I mumbled, rubbing against my nose as if it was the most precious thing in the world. She stumbled closer and kneeled next to my face, grabbing my head and turning it towards her as she inspected my face quietly, her little fingers checking over every single little aspect of my face. You look fine. Thank goodness. But you have a graze on your nose. Do you want me to fix it up for you? The younger me asked, softly gazing at me quietly. Sure, I told her, asking as if it was a question instead of an answer. She smiled brightly at me and grabbed my hand, tugging me to my feet as she stood, walking into the blackness of this world like it was no one's business. I gulped as a question continued to race through my mind as the thing I was meant to fight led me to a place where she was meant to fix my nose as if we were best friends. What the fuck am I supposed to do? We stopped suddenly, the little girl tugging my hand closer to her, so I stood next to her. This is my place, she told me, opening a door in the blackness I didn't even realize was there. Inside was a little cottage. No windows, but still a homey space. It was like a log cabin on the inside, all the furniture and such being something that must have come out from a cliché log cabin, minus all the dead animals that usually litter these types of places. She let go of my hand as the door shut quietly behind us, a soft clicking sound resounding through the room. Have a seat, she told me as she went into the kitchen that looked old and modern. She stood on her tippy toes as she reached into a higher cabinet that stood above her. I looked around the place more. my eyes still being drawn to the younger me as her ears continued to swivel and turn, searching for dangers, and her tail shook lightly behind her with the momentum of her body. "Nice place," I told her softly, my eyes taking in the living space as I finally took a seat on the couch. "Thanks. I prefer to stay here than be out there," she told me as she finally took out a Tupperware container filled with bandages, medicine and different kinds of medical product. "Found it," she said kind of proudly of herself as she closed the wood cabinet and walked over to me as I sat on her couch. She kneeled in front of me, placing the box beside her and taking out a cotton ball as she dabbed away the little blood that was there. "Can I ask something?" "Shoot," she breathed out. "What side of me are you? Like I had a vampire side and werewolf side. What are you?" "I'm you and you are me. If someone did a DNA test, it would tell us that we are one and the same. Not one gene the same or mildly different." She spoke as if she had rehearsed it 100 times over, almost seeming bored by her own explanation. I nodded, understanding what she meant as I continued to gaze at her ears softly that seemed as tense and worried about danger as I usually am. "I don't understand," I whispered to her. She continued to dab away at my nose. "What do you mean?" she asked back, kind of confused, her hand and cotton ball traveling all over my nose as she dabbed away every inch of blood. "I mean, aren't I meant to fight you?" I asked quietly. At this, the young version of me grew rigid. She whimpered quietly as she drew her ears back, gulping loudly. "You are. You just have a choice in what aspect you will fight me," she said, her eyes gazing into mine as she threw the cotton ball to the side and grabbed an alcohol swab. "What does that mean?" Oh. I flinched back as the swab made a connection to my nose. Probably since I hadn't prepared for it and didn't have adrenaline in my body, it hurt more. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Thoughts thanks to your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," she mumbled back, pressing the swab to my nose again. "It means whatever you want it to mean," she told me, wiping away the dust and bacteria that is in my nose graze. "I don't follow." Confused as I stared at this little girl. "Do you remember what the first thing your vampire and wolf side said immediately as you found them?" she told, giving me a seriously look as if I should know the answer when I don't. "I hate change." The little girl laughed and stared at me again as she dropped the alcohol swab on top of the cotton ball and got out a Band-Aid. "They said, isn't it crazy, how someone could find enjoyment from destroying the lives of others? Do you know what they meant?" she asked me, her eyes dazzling with humor. I shook my head no. She rolled her eyes and placed the Band-Aid softly on my nose, pressing it down as it made contact with my skin. "Can you tell me?" I mumbled as she began to pack away the medical box and throw away the cotton ball and alcohol swab. "Not in the rules, sweetheart," she told me as if I was the younger one in this situation. "Why?" "Because I said so, and if you didn't figure it out, you're gonna be here for a lot longer than you thought." I growled and stood to my feet as I watched the little girl wash her hands at the sink calmly, as if I hadn't just growled threateningly at her. "What do you mean I have to stay here?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice in control. "It means what it's meant to mean. You're gonna have to stay here for a lot longer," she told me, calmly turning off the tap and drying her hands with a nearby washcloth. "Bullshit," I yelled, flipping the couch over in a fit of rage. Turning to the girl, she stood in front of me, her eyes annoyed as they stared at me. "What are 2 things that you've ever done in your life?" she asked, staring up at me, almost bored. You either took what was dealt with you, the abuse and torture, or you fought back and killed everyone in your path, killing your family and old Alpha. You've never tried another way, have you?" she told me as if I was a fucking idiot. But her words did sink in with me as my ears drew closer to my head and pressed themselves on top of my head. "No." The young girl smiled brightly. "We're getting somewhere. This is good," she told me, patting my shoulder as if she was praising a puppy for not peeing in the house. "So what the fuck am I supposed to do?" I told her, firmly folding my arms in front of my chest and raising an eyebrow at the little. "Fight me, but a different way." Chapter 40. What? Boss battle what? I asked yet again. "Fight you a different way?" The younger version of me yet again shook her head from the opposite couch I was sitting on, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. "I'm not even meant to be talking to you about this. I've done like 50% of the work of figuring it out. You can do the rest. She exclaimed, slight annoyance at her voice as she continued to drink from her cup. So, how am I meant to fight you? That's for you to figure out. And what the hell does that quote shit mean? Isn't it crazy? How someone could find enjoyment from destroying the lives of others. I honestly just need to get out of here and see Jenny, I said firmly, speaking the quote mockingly as I waved my hands around my face. But my voice turned quiet as I talked about Jen. Well, it all depends on that quote. It's kind of weird, but I've done most of the dissecting. What do you mean? I asked yet again. I watched as the cup of tea she held grew tighter in her grasp, her fingers turning a faint white. You should figure this out. If I have, then you should have as well. I groaned once again, holding my hands to my head and rubbing my ears as I continued to drive on about that quote. Isn't it crazy? How someone could find enjoyment from destroying the lives of others. Isn't it crazy? How someone could find enjoyment from destroying the lives of others. Isn't it crazy? How someone could find enjoyment from destroying the lives of others. It was seriously beginning to mock me in my mind. The quote being repeated over and over again as those 14 words decided my fate. I do know how that quote can fit into some aspects. The way Aiden would torture and abuse me was destroying the lives of others, more specifically mine. He would destroy lives of other own gazer as well, brutally killing and torturing them in front of their loved ones as they were forced to watch. So I'm not allowed to just accept I can be here for the rest of my life. Can I? I asked myself, the little girl's ears telling to me as she heard me speak. Most likely I was quiet for a while when I was thinking that over. You've got part 1 done, the little girl said, taking another long drink of tea as she watched the cup. Then I'm technically not allowed to fight you as well and kill you. Right? I asked again, my hands rubbing my face as I continued to think it over. You're getting there, she said again, taking another long drink of tea from her mug, almost as if it would magically make her disappear. So what am I meant to do? I asked, looking at her again. You're doing it right now, she said again, rubbing her head as she placed her mug on the coffee table. She must have a headache. What? I asked, perplexed again. You're doing what you meant to do right now. Figuring it out. Planning, she said, annoyed as she fell back into the couch. So, I meant to reason with you. Some things clicking into place. Yes, I don't want to go back. Apparently you're meant to convince me. Seriously, I'm not even sure why I'm telling you the answer. The younger version of me explained as she stayed leant back on the rustic couch. As she stared at the ceiling, her tail laying next to her on the couch. Now it was my turn to know the answer. The answer's quite simple while you're trying to help me. You also want to go back. I don't. There's nothing there for us. She mumbled, getting up off the couch and snatching her mug from the wooden coffee table. Walking to the kitchen. Jenny is waiting for us. Nathan is waiting for us, and Sapphire is waiting for us. Even though the whole world isn't, though, we still should go back. We've changed things and now we have a better chance at having a happy life, I said finally. For the first time in forever, my words coming out truthful and not just fake hope. She stopped in front of her sink, placing her mug softly into it as she stared at the shut curtains in front of her. People are going to hate us. Hurt us again. Here I know no one is going to hurt me. I stood up from the couch, quietly walking to the kitchen as I began to speak. We're bound to be hurt. And we're bound to be disliked. Not everyone is going to love us. I'm not taking any chances. She spoke, her voice soft. Her arms quietly wrapping around her body as her ears drew back and tail grew lack. Well, the only way you will know how things will go is if you try it out, I told her, finally standing in the entrance of the kitchen. I've been with you since day 1. Yet you find the urge to go back when I don't, she said, turning around as she leant against the bench. Her arms crossed as she looked everywhere but my eyes. I didn't know what to say as I watched her. She was when I was so fragile and didn't want to do anything. In this point of my life, I had tried to commit suicide so many times I'm not even sure what the actual number was. It was sad as I watched her. She just reminded me of how horrible my old life was. You've been there since day 1. I asked her. She nodded her head solemnly. Then you would have been there, would you think, though, when things started to turn around? I told her, stepping closer. That's all going to be taken away somehow. She spoke quietly, her ears laying flat on her head. Then we have to fight and keep them there. I told her, finally stepping forward again. But I don't want to fight. She screamed at me. Her body slightly leant forward as her hands stayed firmly at her sides. The room suddenly breaking apart at the seams. The walls and furniture turning to dust as we both stood facing off. If you don't fight, how will we win? I yelled back at her, stepping forward as she continued to scream. I don't want to fight anymore. I want to sleep. She yelled, tears falling down her cheeks and onto the remaining wooden floor of the kitchen. Don't worry, you don't have to fight. I will. I told her, stepping forward again as she seemed to stop at my words. You don't have to do anything until you're ready, I said as I stepped forward another time as I watched the breaking apart of the cabin stop in its place. Where only parts of the kitchen were left standing. But for now, let's have a good time in the real world with Jenny. I spoke softly, stepping forward. Nothing good is ever meant to happen to us. She yelled, her hands pressed to her eyes as her sobs sounded around the room. Fat heavy tears rolling down her face as she continued to cry. I finally stepped in front of her. Her small figure tiny against mine out, all and slightly muscular one. Let it all out, I told her quietly as I began to stroke her hair. She launched herself at me in mere seconds, her small arms wrapping around my waist as she pressed her hair into my stomach, steady tears continuing to fall. At this, the room began to remake itself again. The walls returning to their places and the furniture being placed exactly where they were beforehand. I sighed quietly as I wrapped my arms around her, tears coming out of my eyes as I thought about everything. Can we go see Jenny now? The timid voice of the old me asked, gazing up into my eyes. Her face red and blotchy. I smiled softly, sniffling as I ushered myself not to cry too much. To my audiobook extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I said, and instantly I felt this word wash away around me, the young me quietly turning to dust as her tears continued to fall. Once tears of sadness, now only happiness. The cabin broke apart as the dream world vanished and I hopefully went to the real world. Chapter 41. Everything's okay. Any POV. I don't even give a shit about the time anymore. Like, screw that shit. I have finished my depressing stage of Ava being half dead, but now I was pissed off at everything. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Animals and even that fucking glass in the corner of the room that I repair every hour, telling myself, Ava will be thirsty when she wakes up. But I'm not so sure anymore. As I watch her steady breathing. The wound had closed over mere hours ago, and the doctors and Sapphire said it was a miracle. I was smiling at that point and I thought she would be waking up soon. But she hasn't woken up yet. I'm sad and angry and I want to hug Ava so hard that she never leaves again. It's annoying how she left in the first place. I want her with me and I don't want her gone any longer. I can tell Ash feels the same way as we both continue to glare at everything in the room besides each other and Ava. Me and Ash have gotten closer with that unspoken relationship. We're really quite close and he's admitting to being Ava's mate and how he feels horrible about it. I'm not sure what drugs I was on, but I believed and forgave him. I even watched as a grown man began to cry tears of joy. He told me his wolf was so happy that I had forgiven him since I was Ava's protector. I smiled so much that day, and I felt that I had a male role model to look up to in life. Everything was beginning to fall into place, and now what me and Ash now waited for was that final piece to be put into place with Ava being back with me so she can tell me it's okay, and she can make me safe again. My wolf was anxious to run as she hadn't been let out in ages. The reason being we were waiting for Ava, but there's only so much a wolf can take. Ash had apparently been worse. His mate was in a hospital bed, and he hadn't been let out since Ash came here. So both our wolves were hungry to feel the forest around them. So we sat next to that hospital bed, sacrificing the sanity of our wolves as we waited for her to wake up. Just please wake up, Ava. I was whimpering quietly. It was getting harder to restrain my wolf and I could feel her pushing for a shift. Ash noticed this and was watching my form shake, my face contour in pain as I tried to steady my breathing. You need to go for a run. Your wolf is pushing through and at this rate you're gonna seriously hurt yourself. Ash spoke to me while his face scrunched in worry for me. I whimpered again and forced myself to look at him. But she might wake up. I have to be here. I mumbled as I used my arms to wrap around my frame as a pain shot through my chest. I'll come with you. We'll get Nathan to stay here with her, and if she wakes he will tell you. That way both of us are here at the same time, so she doesn't want to murder me. Ash mumbled quietly as he looked away in shame. I felt bad for him, but I didn't feel me bad. The way he treated Ava got me pissed off every time I thought about it. I don't want to Oh, I said shakily as I felt my claws extend through my hands and draw blood. It hurt a lot more than it should since I was resisting the shift and hadn't done it in a while. Ash looked over at me and saw the blood dripping from my palms, and he shot out of his seat and carried me like a baby out of the room. My vision was getting hazy at that point, and I remember Ash talking to a nurse about Nathan. A viscous pain tore through my chest and I scream out once again. Jen, just hold it back for a little longer. I heard Ash yell at me, but I didn't hear anything as I continued to fight my wolf in my mind to not shift. The cold breeze graced me with its presence as I felt my wolf break through my last restraints as she shifted completely into her tiny brown wolf. I smiled as the pain stopped, but I whimpered when I couldn't see Ava nearby. Hey, I heard a voice say, and turned around to see Ash bent over his hands on his knees as he gave me a small smile. Nathan is watching Ava, so go ballistic. I'll join you after I shift. Ash said, and my wolf barked happily as she pushed me to the back of her mind. She sprinted towards the tier as I heard Dash sigh behind me, saying something along the lines of Eric Pup. I laughed in the back of my wolf's mind as he said this, and I relaxed in the dark space. My wolf was happy to take control, even though I wanted to be with Ava. I knew I needed to let my wolf play so she can relax again. She was being nervous these past couple of weeks, and she needed this more than I did. My wolf turned at the sound of paws, and my eyes widened in surprise, as did my wolf's as we took in the huge wolf before us. He was tall and dark black. His bright blue eyes bored into mine, and I instantly knew it was Ash. I smiled at his wolf, and my wolf barked happily. Ash's wolf quirked an eyebrow before dropping to the ground, his butt in the air as his tail wagged happily. I smiled at the sign that he wanted to play, and my wolf barked happily before she sprinted off into the fading sunlight. I heard Ash's wolf behind us and turned to find him deliberately jogging slowly as to let me win. I surprised Ash when I suddenly turned and pounced on his wolf, shocking his wolf as I used my tiny frame to make Ash fall on his back with a thud. A technique I used a lot in battles. I stood over Ash as my tiny wolf stood on his chest, looking proud she had taken down an alpha. My wolf playfully bit his ear before taking off. Ash was too sidetracked to realize I had run away, and I could hear his wolf growling playfully at me. My wolf let out a bark of happiness as he continued to chase after us. I was laughing so hard in my mind, and I forgot completely about Adi in a coma for the time being, and I honestly was in a coma and I didn't even realize it. This went on for a while with me and Ash playfully playing in wolf forms before he did the most thing ever as the sun went down. I was running away from Ash quickly as I heard him gaining on me. I had not so accidentally pushed Ash in a pond, and he was annoyed at me as I heard his wolf bark playfully behind me in a sort of, "I'm gonna get you back," I smiled and continued to run until my dumb wolf tripped and did a flip before landing on her stomach. Ash came up behind us, and before I could get up I felt Ash's teeth lightly behind my neck as he lifted me up like a pup. I barked annoyedly as I growled a punch as Ash proudly carried me by my scruff back to the infirmary. To say I was annoyed was an understatement, and for the whole time I struggled uncontrollably. When we did get back, I remembered how my wolf had forcefully shifted and ripped my jumpsuit. I was annoyed and both embarrassed as Ash shifted behind a tree and pulled some clothes on before he walked over to me confused with hands behind his back. "Why didn't you shift?" Ash asked, already knowing the answer to his question as he asked it smugly. I growled at him as he broke into a wide grin and slight chuckles, before pulling his hands out from behind him and showing me another jumpsuit. "Now go get changed," he said as my wolf gently took the fabric in her mouth and trotted behind a tree and I shifted back. I whimpered and groaned the whole way through as pain rocked my body, the shift hurting more since I hadn't done it in a while. Finally, when I was human again, I pulled the jumpsuit over my tiny and frail body as I walked back out, saw the hospital to find Ash waiting for me. He saw me and smiled a brotherly smile that made me smile happily in return. "Let's go see Ava," Ash told me as he walked inside the hospital with me trailing behind him. I stared at Ash's back longer than necessary as his entire body structure and frame reminded me of me brother, and I couldn't help but shiver at the memory as I brought my hand to my neck where a slight bruise still was. I stretched out my neck until I heard a crack and returned it to its normal position as I smiled at the less tension. Ash briefly turned around and laughed lightly before continuing to walk forward. We reached Ava's room sooner than expected, and I took my seat on Ava's right side and smiling as I grasped her hand, feeling slight warmth from it now rather than the coldness I usually felt. I was growing dazed after a while as I held Ava's hand. Ash was asleep in his chair, his hands still gripping Ava's firmly, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the slight snores that left his mouth. He didn't snore often, but when he did it was rather funny. I turned to the side and found the mirror that sat next to Ava's bed. I caught sight of myself and I cringed. My hair was matted and doily, not to mention the couple of twigs and leaves that were stuck in it. My eyes had large dark bags underneath them and my face seemed to have lost back, and I sighed, turning away and looking down as I continued to hold Ava's hand. I gasped as I felt something I didn't think I would feel for a while and glanced at Ava's face, and I broke into being heavy sobs as she gripped my hand tightly. "Everything's okay," she told me, croak-ly, and I launched myself into her embrace, wrapping my arms around her as I sobbed loudly. She just held me back as I cried into her shoulder. She woke up. "Ipalauji Avi, Skiovi, I'm going to kill you. Janai Agent Extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I screeched loudly once again as I raced around the pack house trying to find Jennifer. The pack members didn't even care as they knew this was a normal occurrence for me, and Jenny had their business as if I wasn't running around the house in nothing but a bikini. A bikini, you ask? Well, while I was lounging nicely in the pool on my giant inflatable dolphin, I had unrealized the fire, fallen asleep in the warm sunshine until I heard giggles from nearby. I thought nothing of it until I felt a blast of water on my back and I screeched loudly before I fell in the pool. Swimming to the surface, I found Jen rolling on the ground laughing as a water gun sat next to her. I growled loudly as she gulped and ran inside, laughing her head off as I swam out the pool to follow her. Now here I was running around the pack house leaving water everywhere as I searched for this little retard that had disturbed my perfect slumber. I ran around a tight bend and I naturally slammed into a wall, tripping over my own feet. I groaned as I held my head and stood up once again, looking down the hall. I watched as a cabinet door suspiciously closed and I grinned cheekily. Walking slowly, I made sure to make it obvious enough to Jen that she was screwed, but not before I built the tension. I slowly walked past the cabinet as I heard giggling coming from inside, and I rolled my eyes at how easy it was to find her. Turning first, I ripped open the cabinet and Jenny screamed from her cramped place on the bottom shelf. I chuckled before grabbing her arms and forcefully pulling her out and dragging her on along the carpet on her back as she struggled to get out of my grip. Walking past the living room, I saw Nathan and a couple of pack members talking with his newfound mate Christina by his side as he had a protective arm wrapped around her waist. She caught sight of Jenny and I as I dragged her past the open doorway of the living room, and as I was out of sight I heard Chrissy laughing her ass off. "I'm sorry," Jenny screamed at me as she tried to look at me above her. I merely chuckled as I continued to carry her to the back door. My tail was wagging in excitement for what we were going to do, Jenny, and my ears were flat on my head as they ached from how much Jen was screaming at the moment. Soon enough, I found the back door once again. Expertly using my tail, I managed to grip the door handle and open the door slightly before I jammed my foot in the crack and opened it further. I had been training my tail for a while now. My wolf side Georgina suggested it as she thought it might be fun to learn. It was useful, you have to admit. I chuckled lightly as she replied, "Speak of the devil, hey. I'm useful as well." Rebecca yelled as I continued to drag Jen outside, being gentle to make sure I didn't hurt her. "No, you're not," Georgina stated matter-of-factly. "You're a co. I built up my wall after that so that you could argue without giving me a headache." I finally got upon the side of the pool as Jen continued to kick and scream in my grasp, and I could but laugh. She was hysterical, knowing that I was about to throw her inside the pool. "I'm sorry, Ava, please," she screeched once again as I reached down and grabbed her, holding her like a baby in my arms. She hooked her arms around me and was continuing to kick and scream. "Sorry doesn't cut my loss of sleep," I then leant back and launched Jenny into the pool, throwing her meters into the air as she came crashing down into the water, her screams finally stopping. Jenny resurfaced soon, and the face she made was like an angry 2-year-old, and I fell on my arse laughing at her. "Yeah, keep laughing," she mumbled. Crossing her arms over her chest, she looked away, only making me laugh harder at her. "Why, you look hilarious." I bursted out again as I heard Jenny's threatening growl from the water. I glanced at her and burst again at her angry face and soaked clothes, and I couldn't help it at all. "I'm gonna get you, Ava," she screamed, and I turned to her as she fumed in my direction. Before she knew what hit her, I had raced to my feet and launched myself into the pool, successfully cannonballing right next to her as I heard another shrill scream leave her lips from annoyance. Bursting from the water, I stood on the bottom of the pool as she continued to kick and swim in the pool, obliviously not able to reach the bottom. I laughed lightly and opened my arms to her, successfully pulling her into a tight embrace as she held onto me like a koala bear. To think that mere months ago I was in a hospital bed dying from a wound that should have killed me instantly is mind-blowing. I had come so far, and I couldn't help but sigh as I held onto Jenny and pull her closer to me, the feeling of protection and safety filling my senses. What did get me upset, though, was the fact that Ash had decided to leave me and return to his pack. It was inevitable because I had to take care of this pack, but I already told him that if did want me, I would eventually give this pack to Nathan and move in with him and become his Luna. But at the moment the pack was chaotic, and giving this on Nathan is cruel, so I decided to stay until the pack is safe, and then I will be with Ash. There's still that flicker of doubt in my chest whenever I think about it. What happens if I go back to his pack and merely get thrown out the door again? I also have Jenny to think about now, as I'm officially her guardian and protector now, and I couldn't bring her into a destructive situation like that. I sighed as I brought Jen closer, kissing her forehead as she hugged me tighter, sensing my mood change. I guess we will wait to see what the future holds.